Hey guys, check out Italian Wine Unplugged 2.0, brought to you by Mama Jumbo Shrimp, a fully updated second edition, reviewed and revised by an expert panel of certified Italian wine ambassadors from across the globe. The book also includes an edition by Professore Attilio Scienza, Italy's leading vine geneticist. To pick up a copy today, just head to Amazon.com or visit us at MamaJumboShrimp.com.
Italian Wine Podcast is delighted to present the series of highlights from the 2022 Wine2Wine Business Forum, focusing on wine communication and bringing together the most influential speakers in the sectors to discuss the hottest topics facing the wine industry today. Don't forget to tune in every Thursday at 2 p.m. Central European Time or visit wine2wine.net for more information.
Buongiorno, good morning everybody. Welcome to this session of Wine2Wine. I must confess that I am very, very excited to introduce you to the wine professional we host today, Peter Yeung. And I'm also thrilled at the topic that Peter is going to cover today. I find this subject very, very intriguing, very fascinating, especially for those like me who are nowadays, in these days, while, preparing budgets, business plans, confronted with setting prices of ultra-premium wines and evaluate the consequences, positive and negatives, of this very, key exercise. So just a quick note to introduce you to the guest today. Peter is a business consultant. You will correct me if I'm not describing or, talking about you incorrectly. An impressive resume that spans from finance to marketing and business strategy, to name just a few. And Peter also boasts a significant track record of remarkable achievement, also in the wine business and in the wine industry. And he's also author of a book that I strongly recommend that you download. I bought the digital version, by the title of Luxury Wine Marketing. Our hope is that by the end of the presentation, we ignite some interesting, solid, useful conversation between us and the audience. So we look forward to that. In the meantime, it's on to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Torre. I don't know if to readjust because he's so much taller than me, but at least there's a stand here to make me slightly taller. Well, thank you for having me. When Stevie asked me to present, she said, take any idea. And the theme is communication. She said, I love your book, take any idea. I was like, okay. What is something that I thought would be a different twist on communication that no one else would be talking about? So I said, first I emailed Pauline Vicar Verona to say, because I knew she was speaking too, and be like, let's not talk about the same thing and do different things. And then I thought, maybe pricing. What pricing communicates as something that's a twist on what's inside the book, Luxury Wine Marketing, but isn't in the book either. So this is somewhat new work, things I think about a lot, but don't always, haven't written down and talked about. So it's a little bit new, so hopefully forgive any mistakes. So, what price communicates. So outside of the book, Luxury Wine Marketing, I also am the host and producer with a friend of mine of the Ex Chateau podcast, which is focused on the business of wine. And both of these will have books in the book corner right after this. So what does price communicate? And I think we want to differentiate what we're not talking about before we talk about what we are talking about. So I think for commercial wines or mass market wines, if you want to call it that it follows standard economic theory. There's a very competitive market with lots of substitutes. So price tends to drive towards marginal cost, and brand it's important, but not as important. It's like if you go to, at least in my view, or when I've been to a French grocery store and you look at the row of Bordeaux, it's not quite clear what you're deciding from one picture of a chateau to another, right? You're looking at price most of the time. Fine wine is totally different. Brand is super important. The customer is completely different. People who are buying fine wines or luxury wines are often not buying wines from the supermarket. And the sales channels are different. whether it's supermarket versus specialty retail and fine dining, and direct to consumer being more important. Obviously, that's more of like an American thing in a lot of cases, but in luxury, controlling the experience all the way through retail is an important element of what differentiates luxury from more commercial pursuits. So what does price communicate for fine wine? And I think there's 5 things. Some of these things do overlap a little, but they're all different. So one is, what are you communicating in terms of your value proposition to your consumers? Are you trying to, be a good value? Are you trying to say that you're the best in the world? When you price a wine, you're sending that communication. So one example from a winery that I used to help manage, Costa Brown in Sonoma, our smallest production, rarest wine was initially priced the same as all of the other single vineyards because it was a thank you to our long tenured members who had been buying for a long time. So we didn't want to, even though we could have priced it 2 or 3 times more and it would have sold, we wanted it to be a thank you, and that was part of the thought process behind the initial pricing. It is now actually priced more than all the other ones, but you're setting an expectation of quality when you price a wine. Like what that price is sends in consumers' minds, this should be of a certain quality. And so that is a big impact. And I think an interesting thing, more anecdotal evidence, but when I see wines that score 100 points from various different critics, especially the Wine Advocate, you usually see them in retail like around $300, or they get to $300 at secondary market. But then there's lots of wines that are priced above that, right? And what does that mean? Well, it's not about quality at that point. Then it's more about brand value, which is sort of the next point, the brand reputation, where you could be $1,000 wine, and that's more than just the quality that's inside the bottle. And so brand reputation is another thing you're trying to project as you price a wine. So for example, Harlan Estate in Napa, when they first launched their wine, they priced it in 1996 at $65, which was the most expensive wine in Napa at that time. And now it's like $850 direct. So they're setting an expectation of who they are in the marketplace with their price. Then there's also relative quality, and I try to have a global set of examples here. So, Gaia back in 71 doubled their price to match the top wines of Bordeaux and Burgundy, to say that we are on par with those wines. And they had to, build up their sales again and get that message into the marketplace. But that was, relative quality, but not just my brand is important, and my quality is good, but how does that quality compare to other wines of the world, or even within your portfolio of wines, how does it compare to other wines that you sell? And then it's also about, lastly, and this sort of ties back to the first one, this is almost like a circle, I think, but of what you think customers are willing to pay. Because we all would like, I think, not to price on cost, but to price on value. And what people are willing to pay is part of that value association. So one example of what I believe now is currently the most expensive wine in the world, I don't know how to say the name properly in French, but Liber Potter, they did a Dutch auction of their buyers to see what they should set their price at. They only had 550 bottles, but it was 30,000 euros in 2015, which was an amazing price to be able to accomplish. So this part is part of the part of it too with pricing was so that I could pull lots of things from the book and make it easier to have a presentation. So this price spectrum comes from the book. Luxury Wine Marketing is our luxury wine pricing spectrum that's focused on U.S. retail primarily in terms of the pricing. And so we have the first category of affordable luxury, $50 to $99 in retail. I have some restaurant equivalent pricing. But it's that taste of wine a taste of luxury for the everyday buyer. So there's that's part of the value proposition communication. There's the association with luxury and luxury brands, if this is a second label or a second wine, and the people who drink them. So sometimes this is about accessing a wine that people you look up to drink, and that you're able to have some association with that. Then 100 to 200 about is like what I call the everyday wine for the luxury buyer. It's special but approachable. This is what, LeBron James might drink every day. So it's an everyday wine for some luxury buyers. And then you get to like 200 to 500, and these are more special occasion wines. So I, had dinner a few years ago with the guy who's the chairman of the NYSE in Atlanta. And, the guy's got plenty of money, very well-off person. And he said $300 was an occasion, it was a special occasion for him to buy that type of luxury wine, even though you objectively say he could be drinking that every day if he wanted to, right? But for him, this matched pretty well. It was like $100 for an everyday bottle, and $300 was a special occasion. But what about the wines that are even more expensive than that? I think from $500 to $1,000, we call them icon wines, because the brand elevates the price so much more than just being what's inside the bottle itself. It's one of the iconic wines of the world. But then there's even a category above that, which we call dream wines, that are $1,000 plus. And that's partially because they're iconic, but they're also very rare and hard to find. And that drives the price of those wines up. So when we talk about price, we're mostly referring to what I call here the suggested retail price. But there's other prices that you need to consider to understand what messages they're communicating. And when I actually looked at this morning, and I thought, oh, the suggested retail price is what you're, as the producer, telling consumers. The average selling price, or what's actually happening in the market, so the price that you see actually showing up in retail or in restaurants because of any promotions that you're doing or people can't move it, is sort of more implicit messages that you're sending the consumer. So you're not saying them directly, but you're implicitly saying them through different promotions or other things. And then the secondary market, with what your wine trades at, whether that's in retail or an auction or other thing, that's what consumers are telling you back, right? So that's the message consumers are telling you around what is your wine worth. Granted, there's a very small, relatively small market for that. So if there's only dozens of bottles trading on the secondary market, don't think you can transact your entire production at that price. But so the average selling price is really important when, especially if it's lower than the SRP, because you can move more wine that way. If it's on sale, you can sell more wine. But it may hurt your brand reputation and put you in a place of lower associated quality than others. And then the secondary market, when it's higher, it can improve your brand reputation, make people want to buy it and think of the investment demand. I always talk about two types of demand for fine wine and for luxury wine, being consumption demand, people who buy it to drink it, and investment demand, people who are going to store it and resell it at some point in the future. And both of those are important as you get to the higher levels of wine. So when you're thinking about setting price, especially for fine wine, I think of 4 key considerations that you have to think about. The first is quality. Like, if you don't have a good quality wine and that doesn't match the price, then it's just not a sustainable price. Like, if basically your quality level is like a $50 wine and you're trying to sell it for $200 or $300, people will discover that over time and not be willing to pay for it. So, an example there is Harlan, again, didn't sell their first releases of wine because he didn't think the quality was high enough. So even though he came out at the highest price in the market, he wanted the quality to be able to support that. And then brand strength, and this is a little bit harder to measure, but it's important to try, and there's different proxies for it. But how strong is your brand? How much do people say? I always give the example of like DRC, right? Like, you can drink any Burgundy, even a lot of others, but DRC is singular in that if you drink DRC, it's not the same thing as drinking any other wine in the world. It's unique and singular, and that gives it that brand strength that makes it able to have more pricing power. I think competition is around the relativity, like where are you in your peer set or in the global peer set of price, and then you can also associate quality and production levels with that as well to understand how you fit within the context of what you're looking at. And super relevant today, I think external influences are really important. I was having a conversation this morning and last night around tariffs and the global markets and the geopolitical actions, whether that's the US or China or their relations with Europe, can dramatically influence like demand for your wines and the markets available for your wine, which will impact, the demand and your price, what you can set the price at. One of the other things to look at, even just as a macro thing today, with the increased volatility and downward volatility of the financial markets, is what does luxury wine correlate with? I hear a lot and read a lot of media that says, "Oh, luxury wine has done so well in the last few years; it's immune to the macro markets and things of that nature." But I did a study back when I was at McKinsey from like the 1990s through the mid 2000s, and the U.S. wine market as a whole, and the market increase was on a CAGR of like 9% growth per year, right? 3% of that was volume, and 6% was price. And so, I had my team look at like what is that correlated with, and what we discovered that the closest correlation was that the price went up with net wealth lagged by a year. So I kind of think of it as like you make more money, you have more money in your bank account, you paid the taxes on it. Now I can like step up and buy a more expensive wine. But why I think this is important is because net wealth has largely gone up over the last time period. And so the rich are getting richer, the poor are still struggling, unfortunately. And that has created the conditions for luxury to do really well over the last few years, even when the overall economy may not be doing as well. And so theoretically, that could be changing depending on how the central banks choose to conduct their monetary policy. And it's important to consider when you're thinking about raising your price. So when it comes to setting a new wine, the price of a new wine, we have to not just look at those four considerations, but also the volume that you're producing and the sales channels that you're going to be selling it in. So took a quote from Antonio Galloni here that says, like, and I see this happen all the time being based in California, that new Napa wines with no track record come out at ginormous triple-digit pricing, like $200-$300, and they have no one has tried the wines. It's not like when at other times, even Harlan back in the day, $65, even though 65 is 1996 is probably 200 or something today, or 100 something today with inflation. People could still afford to try the wines. Now, if you come out at $300-$400 a bottle, people don't even get to try the wine. So, two examples I took from my book is that if you're a new Napa winery, you're in Pritchard Hill, which is like the Rodeo Drive, and you're only making 200 cases, and you got a great score with a famous winemaker, blah blah blah, whatnot. It's just like every other wine, pretty much, that comes out of there. What should you price at? Right? And my thought is like maybe you want to price at the lower end of that spectrum, so 175 to 250 a bottle, because you want to be associated with the top quality. You don't want to be a $50 bottle of wine. And even though a lot of the wines range from 150 to 400, you still want to encourage trial and have people try it for a bit. And since it's very small volume and you're primarily thinking about selling it direct, that should be easier in terms of making that sale. Whereas if you're a new or newly acquired Northern Rhone winery from Côte Rôtie and you're making 1,000 cases, it's all going through wholesale, and it gets a decent score, maybe 100 to 125. Because if you still want to be luxury, you want to be branded as luxury, but you need a lot more proof points in the market, especially if you're in retail and your wine is sitting on the shelf, whether literally or virtually, next to all the other wines of a similar type. People are going to see the differences. And even though there are some like the Gigal Lalas that are $300 plus, there are many that are sub $100 that are very high quality. And so if you're still trying to be luxury, maybe it's in that 100 to 125.
Italian Wine Podcast, part of the Mama Jumbo Shrimp family.
And then, so there's setting a new price, and then you have a price. What do you want to do when you need to change the price, and you're not Bordeaux, which is more market driven and goes up and down. So normally changing means taking it up in most cases. You have to look at those four price considerations and understand where you are today to make that decision. So understanding wine quality, or you're continuing to pump out great scores. We interviewed for the podcast Ex Chateau Jeb Dunnock and was like, so how do wineries like become luxury or top? And his view, which I thought was a normal answer, but wasn't nothing breakthrough, was you just need to have consistently great wine over and over again, right? Over the course of time, keep producing consistently great wine. It's like, okay, that's true. But, all right. Your brand strength needs to be important, and you can sort of measure that with secondary market premium, wine search rankings, or things like that. And, the competition one is interesting because I think when you're low, if you think of the spectrum of wines relative to where you are, if you're actually low priced, it's easier to move up to the middle. And if you're high priced, if you're one of the top, it's actually easier to move up and to continue to move up, because that means you've already established yourself most likely as the top in your region, right? And I see this all the time, especially if I look at Napa, at Harlan and Screaming Eagle, whose price is $800+ a bottle. They're way above everyone else, but because they've established themselves as sort of the cult darling, the wines that people want from Napa Valley, they continue to move their price up, and they're able to achieve that so far. And then, as we just talked about, like the external influences of what's happening in the economy and whatnot make a big difference. I work with a Napa brand who just this year took their price from $350 to $425 a bottle in the middle of this, markets crashing, and it did not work out that well for them in terms of how their offering did. So, some examples of that: Domaine Perot Minot from Burgundy doubled their price from the 15 to 16 vintage. And according to Tribeca Wine Merchants, who we interviewed on the podcast, their people just stopped buying because they thought they have an association of that price, and then to change it double in 1 year was a shock to people. Similar, not quite as fast, happened at Larkmead in Napa, where they'd always been known for being great quality and great value for the price within Napa Valley, and they doubled their price from about 2013 to 2016. And so they changed their value proposition. They were, a value provider, and then now they're market price. So they weren't, expensive when you look at the scheme of things, and you can understand the owner wanting to do that to make enough money. But it was a shock to the consumer, who said they had a consumer who was looking at the value there, and now they need to find consumers who are just more interested in the quality. And so they had to really change their complete customer base, and which also led to complete turnover of their team as well, because there was a lot of differences in how you sell with the different value propositions. So their team turned over as well. But you look at an example like Harlan that we've talked about several times already, increasing their price from $300 to $850 in less than 10 years without that much of a problem. And they're still selling out a small amount of wine, 1,500, 2,000 cases a year, but partly because they have a significant secondary market premium. So even though they sell for $850 now, on the secondary markets, the wines sell for $1,200+ a bottle. And I think I've worked with a lot of people who worked with Bill Harlan, and he often said, I need at least a 30% premium on the secondary market to feel comfortable that I'm going to increase my price. And so he was able to do that. He's also expanded internationally, so sort of created more domestic scarcity and things of that nature to make, the supply-demand balance in the U.S. better to keep this going. But he's made a lot of money this way by being able to increase price. So on that note, tracking secondary market pricing helps you understand what pricing power you may have. Volumes tend to be pretty low. I developed this for Casa Brown when I worked there, and we actually tracked bottles that were offered, at least, so you could see that the volumes are pretty low. If you look at this, I don't know how easy it is to see, but the numbers are like less than 50 bottles being offered at any particular time. So it's not like a high volume of transactions are happening. And it's not even transactions as offering. But there's other sources of data that you can get this from, like LiveX or Wine Market Journal, that have some transaction prices as well from auctions or from merchants that are selling globally. But understanding where you are, what customers are seeing in the marketplace versus what you're offering the price at, your suggested retail price. If there's a premium to that, then you may have more pricing power. And then, importantly, what does discounting do? And I'm not saying don't discount, because there's reasons that you may want to discount, but there's important trade-offs to consider. So, you can increase short-term sales because people psychologically like to feel like they're getting a good deal. They're buying it, and they still have the expected quality being at your suggested price, because you say, when someone buys a wine on sale, they said, I bought $100 bottle of wine that was $75. And so I got a deal. My expectation is the quality is still $100. But it does imply then that you may be having difficulty selling your wine and that the brand is less desirable. So that starts to erode the brand reputation. And over time, it can push the relative quality of what consumers think the category of wine that falls in goes down. And it may ingrain a habit of people knowing that they can buy this wine because it's having a harder time selling at a lower price and only being willing to pay that lower price and making it harder for them to go back to retail at some point. So what are some alternatives that you can do to that? Well, you could have a second label or second brand, although the trade-off is that's a lot of work in terms of marketing potentially and launching a brand. That's not a trivial task, and you don't want to take away from your core task at hand. There are some retailers that focus on curation and may have like a fixed price wine club. So they, sell you 6 bottles of wine for X dollars, and doesn't matter what the wines are inside, but so you can actually discount to them and people won't know what the price of your wine is. Or there's some people who are trying to do like upgrading. So you're paying $30 and getting at least $45 worth of wine or something like underground cellar. And some people, when they sell direct, might have shipping subsidies or things like that. And so that's what setting price for fine wine communicates from my point of view, an array of messages that have to be carefully considered from the winery. So those 5 things, what you think your value proposition is to consumer, what the expected quality of the wine is, reflection of your brand reputation, the relative quality within your peer set or within the world even, and what you believe customers are willing to pay. And looking at data and understanding the 4 price considerations is very important as you go into pricing decisions. Tori was mentioning like thinking about what I'm doing, and so often like grounding yourself a little with some of that data around how's your wine quality been, what's your brand strength, where do you fit in the marketplace, and the external forces that are happening are important to think about as you go into those price setting conversations. And then when you're changing price, to be really thoughtful and prepared, it is an art. I say it's both an art and a science, which is like the subtitle of luxury wine marketing. And pricing in particular is more of an art because you can have all the data. It doesn't tell you necessarily what to do or what the right thing is to do. So there is a bit of a feel associated with that as well, and with the balance of art and science. And I don't think a lot of people track secondary market pricing, and I think that's probably something that needs to be done more of in our industry to really understand what's happening in the marketplace. What are consumers telling us back around what they believe our wines are worth? So that's it. Yeah, feel free to contact me, and I think we have Q&A.
Just to start the conversation, I have a question for you before we pass the mic on to the audience. Let's talk about scarcity. What does scarcity communicate for fine wines? Scarcity or the illusion of scarcity. Not just scarcity because it is true, it is actual, but also the illusion of scarcity. What's your read about this?
Everyone wants what they can't have. So scarcity does have an element of creating more demand, can create. I think there's different types of scarcity because you have true scarcity, not just in the sense of like supply is great or is less than demand, but like it's just a really small amount, like the Liber Potter example, right? There's only 550 bottles out there, so it's really a rare singular item that's collectible. Versus you can have scarcity for a 5,000 case production, but it's more what I would call excess demand. And I think that excess demand creates a notion in consumers that people want it and that it's valuable. And so there's becomes, from the luxury sense, a privilege to own it. Because luxury, and whether you agree with this or not, but the point of luxury is that it differentiates people. And that it says, like a Birkin bag, which is like an Hermes bag, that the bag could be completely the same as any other bag, but because other people know that that's a Birkin bag and that's hard to get and very expensive, that it connotates something about you that is differentiated from everyone else. And therefore, that type of scarcity creates a differentiation, which is what people are willing to pay for luxury.
And on this topic, another question: how dangerous for a brand is it to, let's say, artificially create scarcity?
I think it depends because when you're doing it artificially, you can do it in a way that no one will ever know about, really. Like if you're just holding more wine for the library and you're keeping it yourself, and so what's in the marketplace is truly out there and scarce, and that becomes scarce. That's, I think, no one's going to hear about it. If people can hear about it because you're artificially you're saying that you're allocated and you can't buy it, and then people ask you to buy it and you say sure I can buy it, or it shows up at Costco or in retail, then it's not your scarcity message is being undermined by everything else that's happening. So I think that can be dangerous. You have to be very careful when you're creating it to be consistent in your messaging.
Thank you. I don't want to steal time away from the audience, so I still have a question, but I keep it for later. So don't be shy. Peter is here. Questions for you.
I think we need a mic for...
Hi, great presentation. I have a question. Do you think there's a clear correlation between demand and producers or regions that allow value to be kept throughout the supply chain, particularly in the three-tier system in the United States? For example, Burgundy versus Bordeaux. I was just in Barolo last week, and there was some where the demand is incredible, and there's some producers that have raised their ex-seller pricing to go with that demand, and some that have raised it slightly and allowed value to be kept throughout the system. So what do you think that correlation is and how important it is?
Is the question, so I understand it, that is the macro regional demand supply very correlated with an individual producer? Is that?
Let's take Burgundy and Bordeaux as a specific example. Bordeaux sells through the Place. There's limited margin to be made despite the high prices, whether you're an importer, a distributor, or a restaurant. Burgundy mostly sells through importers, and there's value to be made at all three tiers, whether you're a restaurant, an importer, or a distributor. And do you think that has been allowed Burgundy to continue to increase their demand versus Bordeaux, which still has demand, but not the same way that Burgundy does today?
I think part of that is, not to say, but a lot of Burgundians are mostly farmers and vignerons, and they don't have as many staff for the business side. So they're not allocating optimally, is what I would say, across their global markets. And so you can have the same Burgundy being $100 in South Africa or somewhere, and $1,000 in the US. And so that to me is more about misalignment of allocation and understanding where their demand is and allocating appropriately so that the margin should equilibrate. The other parts of the supply chain shouldn't be having these outsized margins, and there's arbitrage opportunities. In fact, there's some companies that take advantage of this arbitrage opportunity and buy from one region and sell in another, especially the investment focused firms. So that is creating arbitrage, which in a competitive market with good supply chains and things like that shouldn't exist.
I've got a question/comment on the point 3, the message of brand reputation. What we've seen when we've asked producers how they come up to set their price and how they arrive to that decision, a lot of them have been quite honest, saying the only reason I can sell that wine for that price is because I'm working with Pinot Noir or Cabernet Sauvignon, or because I come from Burgundy, or because I come from Napa. So how important do you think in the brand reputation, the collective reputation of something bigger than the producer, but something that comes with the grape variety reputation, or the region collective image? Like, can you sell an $800 bottle of Grenache from wherever that's not really known? Like, how does that collective play into the pricing?
It has a huge impact because I think it sets your specific peer group and what people are willing to pay, and there's an established demand. It's not to say that you can't, and there's examples all over the world with even like a Vega Sicilia that created the whole category of Ribera del Duero, of creating a wine that does establish itself singularly outside of its region. In that case, even created its own region. So you can do it. It's just harder. You just have to go down a harder path and meet more collectors and prove that you're worth it. Or the other examples of even the reason Napa is so powerful to begin with today is from the Judgment of Paris in '76. And so other ways where what I talked about Gaia did, your people are able to do it. You just then have to change your base of who you're comparing yourself to and convince the world and wine buyers that that is the right way to think about it. So it's a lot easier if your neighbor is selling everything for $500 a bottle than.
Okay, Peter, thank you. My name is Victor. My question would be, what do you consider to be the biggest challenge for wine pricing, especially now with global inflation, the crisis, and the war in Ukraine, and the rest of all that? Now, the second point added to this, it's for developing countries in Africa with huge interest or interested in importing. What do you think the pricing strategy should be for producers in Europe, especially because these are economies where potential consumers have very limited access to be able to afford the kind of quality wines that they would wish to have? So those are my questions.
Okay, so the first question was, how do you think about pricing in the inflationary environment that we're in today and the difficult financial markets? I think you have to be careful and do your best probably not to increase price too much, because people are having this impact, especially at the higher end, maybe where I'm based more so in Silicon Valley. If I was based in Houston, it might be different because the energy world is making a lot of money. But in Silicon Valley, a lot of people have lost a large percentage of their wealth due to the crash in stocks like Meta and Google and whatnot, Amazon. And so it's harder for them to pay even more money for that wine. And at the same time, wineries have increasing cost pressures. Grape pricing is going up, labor, everything is more expensive. So you may have to run lower margin for a shorter period of time, but then hopefully continue to build your brand and loyalty from your customer base to help you increase pricing later. I think the second question was around how should European wineries think about pricing in Africa, where there's a great demand for the wines, but they don't have necessarily the ability to pay some of the higher prices. I think if it's truly a huge growth opportunity in the long term, you might consider investing in marketing and sampling to allow people to try the wines, even maintaining your price point, because this is a somewhat global marketplace, and you can have some dislocations between regions, but if they're dramatic, people are going to know about it and not want to buy the wine, right? Or know that they're not getting a great deal. I've heard of people in China, like they still use Wine Searcher to see what the price of wine is in the U.S. and other places to know that they're not getting, ripped off from the people trying to sell them wine. So I think you still need to keep a relatively stable or, correlated price globally. So I wouldn't discount there to try to drive demand, but maybe invest in marketing and have people try it and to build the brand so that when they do have the ability and money to buy the wines, that they're there for that.
Hi, Peter. I was wondering, currently, what do you think the most impactful, influenceable factors are for luxury brand reputation on the global market? What are the things that brand managers and others can actually influence today?
That's a very big question and very broad. So what can brand managers influence for luxury wines? I mean, they can influence everything. I think new categories are being created all the time, and you can establish yourself as luxury. I think the big thing with that is that it takes time, and that you can't become, and it's very rare to become an overnight sensation. Even if you look at, I look at my experience in California, and there's a very small production wine called Ultramarine, which is a sparkling wine that has become sort of a darling of critics and a bit of a cult classic. There's a good secondary market premium. It still took, when you talk to Michael Cruz, it still took like 5 to 7 years, not just to make the wine, but also to build that reputation, to drive that demand, to have it done. And so, there's everything you could do there's a lot of things you could do to influence. When I was helping to run the brand Realm Cellars in Napa, we completely overhauled the label design and the storytelling of how people connected with the brand. And that created a lot more interest and understanding, as well as, getting a bunch of top scores and 100 points and whatnot. So that helped create more demand for the wine to get people more connected to the story and connected to the individual wines than it was before.
I have a question for the US market as it relates to grey market pricing. So obviously there is, the mandatory 3-2 system, and we're dealing with global supply coming into the US. Do you have any advice or examples to give around how to manage that very difficult conversation, either that being with the importer or the collector, to talk about that price disparity?
You mean just the price disparity, or
the ability to purchase? So you have an allocation of a prestige wine coming in, importer is given a certain X seller price. All of a sudden on the market is an X seller from another country coming in, collectors having access to two potentially quite differently priced opportunities to buy from different sourced markets.
Part of that is understanding what the end price would be to the consumer. So if someone's buying the wine from London, in bond or whatnot, then will they have to pay VAT? What's the shipping going to be? If you're buying like a bottle of wine, you're trying to ship it across the world, that could be extremely expensive by the time you get it. So, comparing the value then that each layer of the system is adding can help with that, or the actual price to the consumer. If there is still there shouldn't be a big disparity. If there is, then there's something wrong, I think, somewhere.
Okay, we're going to take one last question from Robert, and then we're going to have to close. Robert, I'm going to give you mine.
Thank you. I guess this is really the million-dollar or multi-million-dollar question. And you kind of alluded to it when you talked about what's happened in Silicon Valley to a lot of people's wealth there. We have seen, I lived in Burgundy when $10 or $15 was okay. My point is, the price of wine has gone up and up and up. And we're sitting here talking about $850 for a bottle of liquid that we consume. Is this going to go on forever, or do you see a point at which we say this is a maximum that people are going to pay in any volume for a bottle of liquid?
Robert, you stole my question.
I think there's short term.
That's not fair.
And long term, right? So people that say the same thing about real estate too, right? Like real estate in the long term goes up. Why does it go up? Well, there's a thing called inflation that we're experiencing now, and inflation makes everything go up. So on a nominal basis, I'm saying this as an economist, I guess, but on a nominal basis, like sure, it's going to be more expensive because money will be worth less, and so on a nominal basis, it will go up. Can people still afford to buy? I think it depends what it is and the demand for it. When you talk to William Kelly of the Wine Advocate, for Burgundy, the production levels are so small that one person can create the market for, one billionaire in China creates the market for that wine and can outpay people by 2 or 3 times. And so as long as you keep finding that one person with a really small production, that's fine. If you're talking about 25,000 cases of, Lafite or Margaux or something like that, you need a lot more people. And so that's going to be more market driven and more of a barrier as to how many people you can find who are willing to pay that price.
Okay, I'm going to close. But before, I wanted to say one thing. I know Peter's slides. First of all, Erica, a gentleman came up to me after your presentation and said, we couldn't read the slides, especially in the back. So then I saw Peter's slides. So I don't know where this gentleman is, but you were in for a treat. So I have some good news, however. Okay, all of the slides and the presentation, there's no live streaming. However, we will be putting them on the platform, the Vinitaly Plus platform, basically, where you have registered. It will be available for, you can replay many times as you want, with the slides included. It will be available towards the end of the month. Okay, and then we will give you, I think, 3 months period for you to replay. So don't go crazy, okay? And don't come up to me again and say that you can't read the slides, because it was incredibly dense. But I want to also echo Ettera's recommendation. please go buy the book. If you are interested in fine wine marketing, this is a benchmark book. This is why I fell in love with Peter Yeung's book, and I said he has to be here for today. So let's give it up for Ettore Nicoletto and Peter Yeung. Thank you very much. You guys have a small break now and come back here.
Listen to the Italian Wine Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Himalaya FM, and more. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the show. If you enjoy listening, please consider donating through ItalianWinePodcast.com. Any amount helps cover equipment, production, and publication costs. Until next time, cin cin.